Hello and welcome to this week's Weekly Rushes, a rushed rush through the weekly rushes for all your latest movie and streaming news in one neat little caffeinated space with my not quite Jurgen glasses on, but my sort of science experiment glasses on. Yeah, so I've got a Bunsen burner and I've got a beaker full of sulfuric acid. So what's happening in the world of movies and streaming this week? Well, the first story, we've been talking about this a lot recently, is again around the Helena Hutchens tragedy. She was the director of photography who was accidentally shot by Alec Baldwin on the film set of Rust. Obviously lawsuits are flying around, but Helena Hutchens' husband was interviewed, or was in interview with Today, and in interview he was sharing obviously about his loss, the loss of his wife, how life has changed irreparably since her passing. But he also went on to talk about how he felt seeing Alec Baldwin, when Alec Baldwin, I don't know if you remember, went on TV saying that curious sentence that he didn't actually pull the trigger. And to be fair to Alec Baldwin, I think he sits in this really curious kind of no man's land of responsibility insofar as, yes, his hand was on the gun, but if there was ever a set of circumstances in which a gun that was loaded potentially and that could inflict or cause harm couldn't be the fault of the person holding the gun, this was that moment, if you know what I mean. If ever there's a moment to not be responsible for shooting someone with a gun, when you've shot someone with a gun, this is possibly the only scenario in which I could imagine it being explainable. But that still doesn't get around the fact that for Helena Hutchens' husband, he said, watching Alec Baldwin, I felt so angry to see him talk about her death publicly and then not accepting any responsibility after he described killing her. Hearing him blame Helena in the interview and shift responsibility to others and seeing him cry about it, I feel like, are we really supposed to feel bad about you, Mr. Baldwin? And this is where this is becoming such a hot potato, this story, because it was the responsibility of the person pulling the trigger. That's literally who was responsible. But were they responsible for the intent or the neglect in terms of not servicing that pistol properly? It's such a tragic scenario that's irresolvable for the family, potentially irresolvable for Alec Baldwin too. And I suppose the only way Baldwin can move on with his life is to think that actually it wasn't his responsibility, as it isn't any actor's responsibility, to check whether a gun should or shouldn't be used. And I think the real focus does sit around, it has to, around the armourer and around the producers of the film. Bill Murray, who's a Bill Murray fan? I'm an enormous Bill Murray fan. I've loved Bill Murray ever since Ghostbusters. Not a particular fan of Groundhog Day. Wasn't a fan of Groundhog Day back in the day even. I found it bizarrely and rather predictably a bit repetitive. No, but seriously, Bill Murray, I don't know what it is about him. It's the fact that he never really wants to be there and doesn't feel the need to be there and doesn't really feel the need to make any effort. And it's kind of like a fingers up, isn't it, to the whole world. I kind of like that. That's what I liked about him in Ghostbusters. He kind of just didn't want to be there, but he was so cool. He's kind of one of those guys who's so uninterested in trying to be cool that he becomes really cool. Anyway, Bill Murray is to star in a new adaptation of a book called Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End. This is based on Atul Gawande's 2014 non-fiction book, and it's kind of not entirely dissimilar to the series that we're seeing with Ben Whishaw on the BBC at the moment called This Is Going to Hurt, which I don't know if you're watching. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. There are a few moments where it misses a beat, or the arch kind of address into camera doesn't feel quite natural enough or funny enough, but by and large, I'm really enjoying it. I think it's crisply edited, it's nicely acted. It gives you a really searing account of what life is like on the front line of the NHS, whilst at the same time avoiding the pitfalls of something like Casualty, BBC series. Well, this is going to be something kind of similar. It tackles medicine and how it can contribute to both life and death. It addresses end-of-life care. This is what the book does. And so Bill Murray is going to be in this, I presume, playing Atul Gawande, the surgeon or the doctor, and it'll be his sort of experiences passing through the incredible highs and lows of being a surgeon. I've just come back from seeing the Real Charlie Chaplin documentary. We'll be reviewing it for the channel. I have to say, you feel you know everything there is to know about these characters, and then something comes along and tells you a whole load of stuff you didn't really know. Or it wasn't exactly that I was told a lot of stuff about Charlie Chaplin I didn't know, but it just did a good job, the documentary, of joining the dots and reminding you of his story and highlighting some of the less, attractive aspects of his personality and his legacy. The reason I'm saying all of this is another huge star of the silver screen of silent cinema, Buster Keaton, is being given the biopic treatment, and he's being given the biopic treatment by the director James Mangold. He who made the 4-hour epic Logan, who made Ford v Ferrari, which I thought was brilliant, with Christian Bale and Matt Damon, a whole Formula One story. He's currently in the process of completing filming and editing of the 5th Indiana Jones film, and this film is going to be, and so he's developing this film about Buster Keaton. It's based on Marion Mead's book Buster Keaton Cut to the Chase, and given the fact that James Mangold also directed Joaquin Phoenix as in the Johnny Cash biopic Walk the Line, I think, you know, there's a good opportunity here for James Mangold to sink his teeth in and get some real characterization and get some tell a strong story soaked in a Hollywood tradition. I do love these films. That's what I liked about the Charlie Chaplin documentary. I can't get too much of behind the scenes and the inner machinations of what goes on in the film industry. The big question, obviously, is who on earth is going to play Buster Keaton? What are your thoughts? Who do you think could be up for the gig? If you follow our Popcorn Junkies Instagram account, you'll have seen the first look image of Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer in the new Christopher Nolan film. Well, Cillian Murphy, who obviously is soon to be seen, in fact this weekend is to be seen in the final season of Peaky Blinders, has been talking about the fact that he was drawn to the character of Oppenheimer, but very much wasn't drawn to the science because he hasn't got the brain for it. He said, "I'm interested in the man and what inventing the atomic bomb does to the individual. The mechanics of it, that's not really for me. I don't have the intellectual capability to understand them." Fair dues. He's drawn to the trauma. He's drawn to the cleft in the heart. He's drawn to the kind of the turgid inner turmoil of doing something scientific that's well-meaning and how it's turned to terrible ends. And, you know, sadly, what with the whole Ukraine and Russia thing going on at the moment, you know, the threat of nuclear war is something that's forever in the background of all of our lives. The Christopher Nolan film Oppenheimer is based on the book American Prometheus: The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. We've talked a lot about the casting choices that have been made for this film. In there at the moment is Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Florence Pugh, Robert Downey Jr., Rami Malek, Kenneth Branagh, a whole host of Josh Hartnett, Benny Safdie. There's lots in there. This will be Christopher Nolan's 12th film. Obviously, his most recent was Tenet. Great film. I'm kind of pleased that he's moving away from that slightly sci-fi kind of roll back on time type thing, though there's an element of that, I guess, an aspect of that in the whole splitting the atom and all that kind of stuff. This will be Cillian Murphy's 6th film with Christopher Nolan, and Christopher Nolan is renowned for shooting on actual celluloid. You know, he likes to shoot on 35mm, he likes to shoot on 65mm, 70mm, whatever it is. He likes to film on film and project on film. In this digital age, it's something that's quite unusual. But with this film, they're going to be shooting it on a combination of IMAX 65mm and 65mm large format photography, but they're also, for the first time ever, they're going to be shooting in IMAX black and white and analog photography, and that promises to be spectacular. So this is clearly a film that we're going to have to see on the big screen. I like that about Christopher Nolan. Whether you want to see it on a small screen or a large screen or not, he drags you by the eyelids to the biggest screen in town and says, "Look." Just want to show this because it's funny. First image, there, of Daniel Radcliffe as Weird Al Yankovic. We mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. He's playing the guy who was the man behind such sort of pastiche hits as Beat It and Like a Surgeon. He said he did piss takes of Michael Jackson and Madonna. And Daniel Radcliffe has donned the hair, looking a little bit like Brian May from Queen, if I'm honest. And they're currently shooting a film called Weird, the Al Yankovic story, telling the story of this pastiche caricaturist and all of the kind of weird and whacked out wonderful kind of details of his lurid lifestyle. Talking about donning the wig, Radcliffe says, "Wearing the Hawaiian shirt is a huge responsibility that I don't take lightly, and I'm honoured to finally share with the world the absolutely 100% unassailable true story of Weird Al's depraved and scandalous life." I have to confess, Daniel Radcliffe is making some cracking film choices, especially when you look at him in Swiss Army Man, a farting corpse, and then in Guns Akimbo or something like that, Akimbo, where he has guns nailed into his hands. He doesn't mind taking really odd roles. Now, did any of you see in lockdown a film called The Host or Host? I think it was British actually, a horror film based upon a seance that was happening on Zoom. All sort of the screen is broken down into the Zoom screens that you get in the screen. And this was a cut above the rest when it came to being scary. You know, various members of the Zoom call being abducted, disappearing, weird goings on and all that kind of stuff. I have to confess, for a low budget lockdown horror film, it was a cut above the rest. It was really good. And the director of that is Rob Savage, and he's now making a remake or yet another iteration of Stephen King's The Bogeyman or The Boogeyman. Well, I'll tell you what the story is. It follows a man named Lester Billings who becomes convinced that a nightmarish creature has been creeping from his kid's bedroom closet to kill them. While he's worried that he might be going crazy, he consults a psychiatrist. Billings' terror continues. What's interested me in this as well is Rob Savage, clearly a good director. It's going to be his first sort of more conventional type horror film, but he's cast David Dastmalchian in there. I probably haven't pronounced his surname correctly. David Dastmalchian. And he plays Polka Dot Man in the Suicide Squad, and he's an absolute sort of unsung hero, though he's pretty well sung hero of the Suicide Squad. His character is really odd, quirky. He's the most unusual of superheroes you could ever expect to have. I mean, he follows polka dots. He's got a fascinating face, this actor. I think he also makes or writes or designs or does graphic novels, comics as well. And I'm wondering whether David Dastmalchian, with his curious look, will be the boogeyman, or whether he'll play the father of the children who the boogeyman is allegedly kind of traumatizing. But I think that's something to look out for. I think it's a really interesting and intriguing prospect from a very talented and relatively new director. This is a bit of gossip, The book's just been written. They've published it in, I think, Vanity Fair or something. But apparently all was not good on the set of Mad Max Fury Road between Charlize Theron and our dear beloved Tom Hardy. What will our friend Lisa say about this? Apparently in a new book called Blood, Sweat and Chrome, The Wild and True Story of Mad Max Fury Road, things broke down massively between Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy. By all accounts, Tom Hardy would repeatedly turn up late on set, sometimes 2 to 3 hours late at a time. Other members of the crew said they didn't want to touch each other, they didn't want to look at each other, they wouldn't face each other if the camera wasn't actively rolling. I mean, imagine that. You're in a scene together, in tight close-up scenes in cars and what have you, not looking at each other every time you cut. Hardy, as I say, would repeatedly turn up on set 3 hours late, despite knowing that Charlize Theron had turned up early. And apparently on one occasion, Theron shouted, "Fine the fucking CUNT, $100,000 for every minute that he's held up by the crew." And in response to this, Tom Hardy went right up to her face and said, "What did you say to me?" And he was quite aggressive. And after this, Charlize Theron insisted upon having a female producer alongside her because she felt so threatened. My God, I mean, what's that about? I mean, that's, you know, okay, we've heard of lots of on-set altercations, but two lead stars of a film, one feeling threatened by the other, and the other one just kind of, you know, in her face and them never looking at each other, is just diabolical. To be fair, to Tom Hardy's credit, after this excerpt and this book was published, he stated he was in over his head in many ways. Don't necessarily think it justifies being 3 hours late onto set. TV series, new TV show, Jim Sheridan, 6-time Academy Award nominee, perhaps best known for My Left Foot and In the Name of the Father. Jim Sheridan is making a series with his daughter, Kirsten Sheridan, all about the Lockerbie bombing. It's coming to, I think it's coming to Sky, and then it's going to Peacock too. So it's going to explore what happened when tragically 259 passengers and crew were killed when a bomb blew up in a Pan Am Air Flight 103 over Lockerbie, and it also killed, I think, 11 residents underneath. The series will follow the events from 1988 when the crash happened, when the explosion happened, and it's going to be a very emotional and moving portrait. I think it follows things from the perspective of a man or a husband and a father who pushes his marriage, his health and his sanity to the edge, says the blurb. And Jim Sheridan, I think, is a sensitive pair of hands to deal with this incredibly sort of complicated and emotional story. The crown jewels have been stolen. Not the crown jewels, the crown's jewels have been stolen. Yet apparently in Yorkshire they were shooting on set. There were 3 huge crew trucks full of all sorts of props and jewellery and crowns, including a replica Fabergé egg for scenes with Imelda Staunton playing the Queen. They got robbed. They disappeared. Apparently it's £150,000 worth of crown jewels replicas have just gone missing. And what's bizarre about this, a Netflix spokesperson has said, "We can confirm the antiques have been stolen and we hope that they're found and returned safely. Replacements will be sourced. There's no expectation that filming will be held up." Now, officers investigating the incident said that all existing lines of inquiry have been exhausted. Doesn't feel like they've really particularly tried. So somewhere there's the contents of 3 trucks. Whether they're real antiques, God only knows, but £150,000 worth, that's a big write-off, isn't it, on a film set? So the crown's jewels have been stolen. There's almost a Netflix drama in that, and you sometimes wonder whether maybe a Netflix exec stole them in order for a documentary for Netflix to be made about the crown's jewels being stolen. I don't know, just a hunch. And finally, James Brown, a brilliant, singer, shrouded in controversy, all sorts of drug issues, terrible treatment of wives and what have you. Again, another one of those characters that's a flawed character. Well, Mick Jagger is exec producing a new documentary series, a four-part documentary series called James Brown, Say It Loud. That's the working title at the moment. It's set for 2023 release to coincide with what would have been James Brown's 90th birthday. It's going to have interviews with friends, family, collaborators. It's going to use archive as per usual. Yet another documentary series. I haven't seen enough about James Brown, to be brutally honest. I know something else was made, I think, in 2014. But I don't feel I can get too much of him. I had the great privilege of filming on stage with him many years ago. And he did this curious thing where he walked onto stage, fell flat on his face and jumped back up. He used to do this quite a lot. He'd just go face plant and come back up. But wow, what a man. He was very sweaty, but he was incredible. You felt like you were in the presence of, soul royalty for sure. Mick Jagger, who's exec producing, as I say, says, "I'm thrilled to be producing the 4-part documentary series with A&E, the broadcaster, delving into the fascinating life of James Brown. He was a brilliant performer, he certainly was, who inspired me from the beginning and was deeply committed to the civil rights movement. I've always admired James and learnt so much from him. Like all these things, I hope they do tackle the more troublesome aspects of his character, personal life and career. I think I'm right in remembering he took a sawn-off shotgun and threatened to shoot his wife. I mean, I think there was definitely some issues with domestic abuse there. He obviously had drug problems, drink problems and what have you. So it'll be good to, hopefully it'll be a warts and all portrait from all angles. And I think that, those warts and all portraits, you often get to see what these great talents had to overcome in order to achieve what they achieved, and so sometimes that can actually add to their the legend of who they are. Which brings us to the films of the week. And the films of the week this week, first up is The Duke, which is a kind of classic British comedy history type film. A safe bet, a safe pair of hands. Jim Broadbent in the lead. Helen Mirren plays his wife. He's a 60-odd-year-old taxi driver who steals a Goya portrait from the National Gallery and then effectively holds the painting hostage and tries to get ransom money from the government to help pay for elderly care, elderly people in his communities. It's a rags to riches story. It's about the haves and the have-nots. It's it's a feel-good, salt-of-the-earth, real-life story portrait of a man who tried to find his own way of helping those people in the community who had no one else to help them. So I think if you fancy something that's light, a bit frothy, with classic actors in it. I mean, Jim Broadbent, what not to like, Helen Mirren, what not to like. Also coming out this week, I can't say I'm drawn to this, is Serrano, the retelling of the Serrano de Bergerac story. It stars Peter Dinklage. I mean, it's a classic story of, the man who has dazzling wordplay and swordplay, but he's convinced that his bad looks won't snare the love of his life, Roxanne. I'm always reminded of the Steve Martin comedy Roxanne, which for me was a brilliant twist and reversion of the Serrano de Bergerac story. Obviously, he had the great long nose, and he was worried that he just couldn't woo her or make her look past his nose. Well, presumably this is going to be something similar with Peter Dinklage. I believe it's a musical. They break out into song. That for me is a bit of a red flag because I'm not a big fan of that. It's directed by Joe Wright, who did direct The Darkest Hour with Gary Oldman as Churchill. Gary Oldman went on to win the Oscar, so there's some good credibility there behind the camera. I'm not entirely certain if all those ingredients together make something that is a compelling watch for me, but if you like a bit of history, a bit of costume drama, a bit of musical, why not? And finally, an odd one. If you're a rock musician type who likes horror films, you're probably going to like this. It's Studio 666. It's the Foo Fighters go into a recording studio in a mansion to record their 10th album, and in the process, Dave Grohl looks like he's possessed by something completely unspeakable, like the soul of Marilyn Manson or something like that. His eyes go black. Anyway, it's a horror film set within a recording studio, and I think it's going to be the ghosts and the weird goings on of previous rock stars. And let's face it, if you've ever looked really closely into the faces of Mick Jagger, Ronnie Wood, Keith Richards, get a photo of them and really look close into their faces. You've got, horror stories just beckon. You've got the ghouls of rock legend there. So, yeah, Dave Grohl is going to be absolutely terrified and possessed by rock legendary. And there you have this week's Rushed Rush through the weekly rushes. Share your thoughts on the stories. Tell us what you like. Have a good weekend.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.